that have happened over the course of the last couple of months, years, and even decades by the time we get to the end of it. It's in regard to how we manage lice in any given school based on age group, based on who's affected, and things of the sort. That being said, we want to give you just a quick moment or two to share with us any questions or concerns that you may have. And for many of you, you may actually have already been exposed to the AAP update about how to manage lice on campus and whether or not kids with an itchy or a scratchy head may actually need to go home for the day. And so if you've experienced that or you have any feedback that you are willing or able to share with us, we certainly want to gather that towards the beginning of the conversation. And then towards the end, we'll actually share some of that back with you. So that being said, we'll get started in just a moment, but please feel free to share your questions in that question box on the right-hand side of the screen. And with that, again, good morning and good afternoon to those of you in either on the East Coast or parts of the world where it's afternoon already. For those of you on the West Coast, good morning. We hope that you're enjoying the same beautiful weather that we are. We're excited to have you all with us today, and we are going to get started in just a moment. And before we do, I always like to just briefly introduce who we are and how the heck we got to doing this webinar series. And so my name's Chris, and I'm the founder and CEO of Jockey Emergency Services, a school safety company, basically. And we started out with this goal to provide event safety and CPR training and things like that. And as we grew and as we started to work with schools, we started getting that question, well, what else can you do? And so since then, we've developed a number of different programs that we offer to our schools, everything from emergency preparedness consulting to business continuity creation, and even helping actually staff health offices. So whether we're functioning as a director of health services or as a health aide in some instances, our team actually is there physically on site and on a day-to-day basis delivering health care to students. And that's really where today's topic came from. So the idea and the concept around how to manage a student with lice is one of these things that everybody has always had to deal with, or at least as far back as I can remember. But the way that we actually manage it has changed over the course of just the last couple of months. And we have this new option to look at this in a little bit of a different way and through a different lens. And so that's really what we're excited to share with you today. As has been the case throughout this entire webinar series, we definitely and tremendously encourage you to share any questions that you may have with us on the right-hand side of your screen. Throughout the conversation today, we'll answer those sort of as they come in as well as towards the end. And in addition, today I'd also like to give you the opportunity to share any specific feedback or thoughts or challenges that you may have had in encountering this conversation around what to do with students with lice. And finally, before we get off the phone today, we'll share with you two really sort of interesting components of this conversation. One of those is staff and faculty and how to manage those of you that have adults on campus with lice. And next, really to set up some next steps so that you're really comfortable moving forward and taking the next steps and deciding how you're going to manage lice from here. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome Caitlin Roberts, our safety consultant in the Northern California region. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. My name is Caitlin. Welcome to the webinar today. Some of you guys have heard me on the webinars in this past couple of months. I've been doing a lot of stuff on lockdowns and movement restriction and lockdown devices and all this stuff, but I decided to take on head lice for you guys. I am going to show you guys some pictures of lice, so be prepared. While I was creating this, my head was getting very itchy. I think I scratched my scalp off, so just be warned. Let's see. So today we are actually going to talk about what head lice is. We'll talk about how it actually spreads from person to person, because we know that when one person has lice, most people tend to get lice after that if we don't take care of it properly. So we'll talk about how it actually does spread so we can prevent that in the future. We'll talk about what to do if your child or your student or even yourself is exposed to lice. There's a new message, like Chris mentioned, from the American Association of Pediatrics. So I have a handout that I'll give you guys at some point, and we'll basically give you the gist of what they said and how to take care of lice moving forward. And then just something I like to throw in there as well, there's some recommendations that the American Association of Pediatrics has on how to treat your home and your classroom in case there is a lice spread or a lice outbreak. And we'll talk about how you can prevent lice spread if possible. So starting off, we're just going to kind of define what head lice is. It's actually the plural form of the word louse. So if you hear me using those interchangeably, that's what that means. A louse is the actual bug, and lice is an infestation of multiple louses. So a head louse is a small, wingless, parasitic insect. They spend their entire life on the human scalp, and they feed exclusively on human blood. Just a couple of FYIs for you guys, because lice is something that makes us all itchy and we feel really gross about it. They don't carry any bacterial or viral infectious diseases. They're kind of just a nuisance, is what the American Association of Pediatrics and the CDC says. Of course, we want to get rid of them once we have them, but it's not like you're going to get incredibly, incredibly sick once you have them. And they also don't signify poor hygiene. We tend to think, ew, you're infested with bugs, this is gross, you don't take care of yourself properly. That is not the case. Louse have been around since the dawn of man. They are always around. Like it says right here, they live on the human scalp, so it's something that we're always going to have to deal with, and sometimes you just can't prevent it, not even having really good hygiene. So we'll explain that in just a second. One of the biggest things that I noticed when I started doing all of this research on head lice is that a lot of people tend to mistake dandruff or little things in the hair for head lice. So how do you know that it's head lice and not just dandruff? So if you look at that very quickly, they're very similar in appearance. If you kind of just glance at somebody's head and you see some flakes in there, head lice and dandruff look pretty similar. But if you go in further and you look, you investigate deeper, they are different. So dandruff, it has a scaly appearance, it's yellowish white, and they're dry or oily flakes. Head lice is actually a bug. So there's a couple of different forms. There's the nits, which are eggs. They're tiny white speckles, and they sit close to the scalp on the hair. I'll show you a picture in just a second what they look like so you can kind of see. Then there's the actual louse itself, which is a small tan insect. They're about the size of a sesame seed. Now, I thought I was kind of silly putting this in here, but some people get really squeamish with bugs, and I am actually going to show you some pictures of the bug itself. So just a warning, I'm going to show you images. If you don't like it, just look away for a second. So this is dandruff. As you can see, I'm going to move my mouse over here. These are the dry flakes. They're kind of scaly, and they sit in the hair kind of just in a random sense all over the place. Just for your information, I'm sure a lot of us have experienced dandruff at some point, so I'm sure we know what that looks like. But moving forward, these are what nits are. So see, they actually do look like little eggs, and they are on the strands of hair. This is a sign that you can potentially have lice. Now, sometimes you can still have nits in your hair after lice has already been taken care of, after it's already gone out. So unless you find an actual live louse in your hair, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have an infestation at that time. So obviously, if you have nits in your hair, you'll want to get rid of them, but these are the eggs, and this is how an infestation actually spreads. This is the actual bug itself. This is a really, really zoomed in picture of it, obviously, but this is what it looks like. It's that small tan bug, looks like a sesame seed, and you will have lots and lots and lots of these on your head. I'll show you in just a second. There's a video that went around on the internet about a lady who used a Nit Comb on her son. Let's just go over. So she's using a Nit Comb on her son, and you can actually see these are the live bugs that were in his hair. Now, if you're ever unsure if it is dandruff or if it is lice, use a Nit Comb. You can brush through your hair, and you can tell actually it moves away really quickly. But if you guys have ever seen this video online, you can see there's a whole bunch of bugs. So that's a telltale sign that it's actually lice and not just dandruff. We'll let it go for just a second. We'll talk about what a Nit Comb is and how that helps you in just a second or later on in the webinar. So if you've never seen one of those before, don't worry, we'll talk about it. Let's talk about how head lice actually spreads. So the only way that lice can spread is by direct head-to-head contact. The louse is wingless and it cannot actually jump onto another person. If it's off of the human scalp, it will only survive about 48 hours or so. So really direct head-to-head contact is the only way to actually get a full infestation. Also, according to the CDC and the American Association of Pediatrics, most initial infestations of lice happen off school grounds, but once one student has it, if you don't take care of it, which I'll give you the message later on, that's where the spreads actually happen. The most common ways, again, that head lice spread is through school and through sharing items. Sharing items such as hats and scarves and coats and even brushes or hair ties, things like that. So we'll talk about that more in just a second. Just a quick poll question. You guys will see it pop up on your screen in just a second. How many of you guys have actually had to deal with a lice spread at your school? Okay, I'll give you guys just a second. Okay. So it looks like actually about 75% of you guys have actually had to deal with a lice spread at your school, and I was just thinking about this morning. So when I was younger, just a quick side note, so when I was younger, growing up, my mother actually owned and ran a daycare. So this was something that we dealt with quite regularly, and the reason being is that we didn't know how to actually properly take care of it. Once that lice spread actually happens, especially when you're dealing with little kids, like she had a daycare and a preschool, so they did nap time, and obviously little kids are really nice and they like to share their hats and things like that. It spreads, and so it's really up to the adults to take care of those students, ensure that they're not spreading it, and ensure that they inform the parents properly so that they can take care of it at home. Now, let's get back to this for you guys. Now we're going to talk about watching your students and things like that in just a second, but yeah, it's really, really important if you know or have a student who has lice, it's really important to inform the parents so that they can take care of it at home. Now at schools, the most common way that lice actually spreads is by playing sports. That head-to-head contact happens quite frequently. I played sports all throughout high school and even middle school and things like that. Head-to-head contact does happen quite often, and it doesn't have to be head-to-head, like you're rubbing your heads together or anything like that. If you just touch somebody's head who has lice on it, they will transfer over. Also on the playground, it's the same kind of concept as playing sports. Sometimes you guys rub your heads together, or I don't know, sometimes kids play weird games where they put their heads together and run around in circles. I have no idea, but it can happen on the playground. Slumber parties, obviously, because you guys are laying down. You guys are, they can be sharing pillows. They can be sharing blankets and things like that. At summer camp as well, because same thing, sharing blankets, sharing pillows and things like that, and then nap time again. Now, it's less common, but it's still possible that you can pass head lice to another person by sharing clothing. The reason that it's less common is because, like I said, once the lice is off the head within 48 hours, it dies. So sometimes if you take your hat off and you don't wear it for a couple of days and then you hand it to somebody else, it's less likely that you're actually going to get the lice, but it can still happen. It's more possible if you take your hat off and you have it right then and there and you give it to the other person. It's more possible then. You can share hats, scarves, coats, hair ribbons, barrettes, brushes. And also, if you lie on a bed, couch, pillow, or carpet directly after somebody else who has a lice infestation was just laying on it, it can get transferred to you as well. What do I do if somebody I know has head lice? Now, it used to really, really freak us out. It's kind of gross, like I've mentioned. It's, you know, they're bugs. They're a nuisance. We don't want to have them. So there's a couple of main questions that I've kind of formulated that most of you guys are probably thinking right now. Do I send my child to school? How do I get rid of them? And how do I make sure that I don't get them? So first of all, do I send my child to school? There is a handout that we're going to give you guys in just a second. It's actually the handout from the American Association of Pediatrics. They just updated it a couple of months ago with new information about how to deal with an outbreak of lice. Now, I will warn you, when you open it up, it's about 15 pages of a lot of medical jargon, so I kind of broke it down for you guys. The message from the American Association of Pediatrics basically says it's a nuisance, not a serious disease or a sign of poor hygiene. It happens. There's also, we used to have no Nit policies at schools, which is if you have lice, you're going home and you cannot be at school at all. They've kind of gone away from that, and they are saying now that no Nit policy should actually be abandoned. Children actually can finish their day at school, be treated, and then return to school. The most important thing is to inform the parents of what's going on, especially if you find it at school, because generally, a lot of the time when you find things like this, it happens at school, or if it happened at school, you can see it there. So it's important to inform the parents of what's going on so that they can take care of it at home. But you don't immediately have to send them home. Just ensure that they don't have any head-to-head contact, ensure that they're not doing anything that can potentially pass it on to another child. And then obviously keep an eye out, moving forward, keep an eye out to make sure, since you've had lice in your school, you know, at that time you found one kid who has lice, just keep an eye out and make sure that you don't see any other kids so you can contain it quickly rather than having a full-blown outbreak. Secondly, how do I get rid of them? So I kind of pulled from the CDC, which is the Center of Disease Control, and the American Association of Pediatrics. So for one, you have to detect them early. Don't wait until you have a full-blown, their head is completely covered in, lice. It's a lot harder to get rid of. So just detect them earlier. Use a safe, affordable, over-the-counter medication that has 1% permethrin or purifins. I'll show you in just a second a couple of those kinds that you can use. If those don't work and it's a chronic infestation, you can use an over-the-counter pediculicide, which is like Lice MD. So here, let me get to the next slide. And I have some pictures for you guys of some ones that you can use. Sorry guys, technical difficulties. Let me just get over to the next slide. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So the pediculicide is the Lice MD. That is like a shampoo type of thing, and it also comes with a comb, and it's cool. You buy the whole thing. Not cool, but you buy the whole thing, and it has the shampoo in there, it has the Nit Comb, it has the gloves, and all the stuff that you need to take care of it. They really only recommend this if it's a serious outbreak. Now, if you find just some nits in the hair, or you find a couple of blobs in the hair, you can use Rid, which is this one right in the middle. It's a lice-killing shampoo. Or you can use Nix. Kind of random. I have a sister who's a cosmetologist. She was just in town this weekend when I was working on this, and this is relevant. But when she was going through cosmetology school, this is one thing that they actually had to talk about because lice has to do with the hair. One thing that they told them to use was Nix if they found somebody who has lice in their hair. So that's why I put this one here. That's what they teach them to use, and apparently it's pretty good and gets rid of them quickly. Now there's also lots of homeopathic things that you can use to get rid of them. I didn't put any on here because none of them are scientifically proven. But if you have one that you know works, then feel free to use that. Okay. And then you also, getting rid of them too, you also need to follow up with nit removal and wet combing of the hair, which is what you saw in that GIF before, which was the lady with the little comb, and that actually, you know, you can comb through the hair, and they're very fine-toothed combs, and so it basically just picks everything up while you're combing their hair. So you want to follow up any sort of use of this shampoo or anything like that with nit removal and wet combing. These are kind of what they look like. So I got a picture that kind of zooms in on what the teeth look like. So they're super, super close together. They have little grains on them so that it can pick anything up that's in the hair. There's a couple different kinds. It really doesn't matter. Lice removal combs are lice removal combs. So long as you're using it, you're going from the base of the hair. I have a picture here. You're going from the base of the hair and you're doing it in strands. So pull a strand and go from the base of the head and pull all the way through the hair, and you're trying to get all of it out. Finally, how do I make sure that I don't get them? Now, this is kind of an unfortunate one. There's no surefire way to ensure that you don't get lice. Lice is just a fact of human life. It's been around since the dawn of man. It lives its entire life on the human scalp. It's something that will always be around. So unfortunately, you can't 100% prevent not getting them. However, once someone you know has lice, check yourself to ensure that it didn't get passed to you. You can, if you find any in your hair, then you can use some of those treatment options so that it doesn't become a bad infestation. Poll question for you guys. You'll see it pop up on your screen in just a second. Does your school do anything to actually prevent a lice spread? Okay. So it looks like we're sitting at about 41% say yes and 59% say no. So moving forward from here, when you find somebody who has a lice infestation or somebody who actually has lice on their head, it's important for one, like I've been mentioning, and it seems kind of common sense, but people forget to do it, you have to let the parents know. Also, here we go. Those up on the screen. Also, when you do notice somebody has a lice infestation, that's when you're ensuring that the little kids are not, sharing their scarves and sharing their hats and sharing their brushes and their barrettes for, the ones that they put in their hair or anything like that. Now, if you want, I know we might have had a little bit of an issue getting this handout out to you guys, but it'll be posted on our YouTube page. It's just a link to the American Association of Pediatrics. There's some information in there about how to prevent lice spreads in a school setting if one person has it. Okay. Now, in your home, all household members should check to see if they have any lice. So if your little brother or little sister, or even if the parent comes home and you guys have your student had a lice, you need to check to make sure to see if you have them. Also, all of your pillowcases, blankets, sheets, really any linens that you have in the house should be washed and dried at temperatures hotter than 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That will actually kill the bugs and ensure that no eggs survive so that they can't come back. And then all brushes and combs should be washed and sanitized just to ensure that there's no nits on there. Now, at your school, if you do have a lice outbreak, you need to wash and sanitize any nap time products. Now, just pulling from when my mom had her preschool, they had the little mats that you put on the floor, and sometimes they'd have little pillows and blankets and things like that that they put down. Nowadays, I think more we're kind of moving towards the kids bringing their own things, but you want to ensure that anything that they use for nap time is being washed. And then you want to ensure that they're avoiding any head-to-head contact. Now, it's really important, especially with little kids, you don't make them feel like an outcast because of this. You just want to make sure that when they're laying down, they're not laying right next to somebody where their heads can touch or anything like that. You don't want to make them feel like, you know, there's something wrong with them or anything like that. But just keep a conscious eye out to make sure that there's no head-to-head contact. And then encourage your students to avoid sharing personal belongings. And that includes jackets as well, because our jackets touch the back of our neck. And one thing that I did not mention about lice, but most of the time when lice do connect to the head, you will find the infestation behind the ears or at the base of the neck, kind of like I think it's called the nape of the neck. And so your jacket actually touches that part of your head, and so they can, you know, connect onto that. So just encourage them to avoid sharing those. And if you do see it, just, you know, mention it to them. I just want to follow up with you guys here. I know that we're moving forward a little bit quickly. Chris is going to come in just a second and talk to you guys about, you know, what we should do moving forward and all of that. Right now, you should have a good understanding of what lice is, how it actually spreads, that message from the American Association of Pediatrics, which is basically your kids don't have to go home. They can actually stay in school. They can continue their day. They need to go home and be treated, and then they can return to school. Some of those treatment options include you can do your homeopathic ones, the ones that your family has done for ages and ages, but the ones that are recommended by the AAP and the CDC are to use the pediculicides or the creams or the shampoos, and then follow it up with nit combing. And then again, just to prevent it, you don't want any head-to-head contact. Wash anything that has been exposed to the lice in waters hotter than 130 degrees. Make sure that you sanitize any brushes or combs or anything like that, just to ensure that nothing actually spreads. And I think I hear Chris on here.
Indeed, and hopefully not too loudly, that is.
Okay.
And as we have talked through the sort of components of this, right, we've talked through the identification of lice part. We've talked through managing it once it's shown up. We've talked through how to manage it in the home. There are a couple of other things that we do from the school perspective that really do help to make this work and help to get rid of the lice as quickly as possible, help to ensure that we contain it within a single class if at all possible, and ultimately help to make sure that we're managing the whole situation well. And there are a couple of really important pieces. And the first is that as soon as we become aware of a lice case, even if it's just a single student, that class or that group of students has a notification that goes out to families that says there's been a case reported, we're aware of it, we're cleaning up at school, and here are some steps that you should take at home. And each of the steps that Caitlin shared earlier are steps that should be recommended. So taking a look to see if lice can be identified, making sure that if they are identified that they're managed accordingly, and frankly, if you've taken a look on Monday, that you should really remind your families to take another look a couple of days later, because at times it can be difficult to see the smallest of the lice, and as they grow a little bit, they tend to be easier to identify, easier to see. A lot of families will elect to hire a lice expert, and certainly that's an option. And if you have a lice expert that you would like to recommend, I certainly wouldn't want to discourage you from doing that. And frankly, if you don't have a lice expert and you would like one, let us know, and based on the area in the country or state that you're in, we can certainly recommend a couple for you. That being said, it's one of these things that typically can be identified either at the school level or at the family level, and every school has a little bit of a different policy there. If it's going to be identified at the school level, then it should be either the school nurse or the health aide, or of course if it's a Jaffe health aide in place, then that person that's responsible for doing a check. And that check should not just be that one student, but should be the entire class. And to put that into context, if you notice that there's a case in the first grade classroom, and let's call it 1A for all intents and purposes, everybody in 1A should be checked. If there's reason to believe, or you're thinking that not only 1A, but also 1B, 1C, 1D, or however many first grade classes that you have are also impacted, then it wouldn't hurt to do a check of them all. And then a letter should go out to that family, to the family of the, or all of the families in that class. So again, going back to the 1A example, all families in 1A, that says, we found a case and here's what you can do about it. we should be careful not to identify the student specifically. And as Caitlin said earlier, it's important not to have them feel singled out or be singled out, but it's also important that we maintain this information as basically a secret. And the reason for that is that this is health information. And so we're not authorized to release that Timmy Johnson or Timmy Jones in 1A was the student that was impacted. This was important before, but now that the AAP, or the American Academy of Pediatrics, has come out and said that we don't need to send students home, or they don't need to stay at home while they go through the lice treatment process, it's even more important, because this is a student that's going to be playing on the playground, going to be sitting in the classroom, going to be in all of the regular places that they would be, and so identifying specifically which student it is not appropriate and also not going to set them up for success. Now, if this is first graders, or if this is kindergartners, or if it's younger students, don't get me wrong, I realize that there's a good chance that the student who is impacted will probably be talking with their friends and their peer circle about it, and that's fine. We obviously don't need to control that, and frankly, we couldn't if we tried. But we, at the school level, should not be sending out any sort of formal communication that says it was Timmy Jones in 1A. Now, the next piece of this is if we decide to adopt a policy as a school that says that students can stay on campus and will continue to come to class and continue to play on the playground and things like that in spite of lice, then it would make sense, and you are authorized to let the teachers know which student it is, and to let any coaches or specialists or anybody else know what student it is, so that they can help basically control the play and the activity of the student. And to put that into context, if you're sending a student to, let's say, music class, and they're going from whatever they were in the morning to music and then to art, and then all of a sudden now they're out on the playground, all of the people that the student would come into contact with that are adults or staff or faculty on campus should really be aware of the specific student that's been impacted, and should be doing as much as they can to try and prevent that student from sharing the lice with anybody else. This is sort of the opposite of sharing is caring. And so if we've decided that as a school, again, we're going to allow the student to stay, we've notified the families of the class, of the student that was impacted, that the student, or that rather there was a case of lice in the class, we've notified specialists and anybody else who may come into contact with the student of the incident. We've really done all that we need to do from a communication standpoint and from a management standpoint, and the only other thing that we should do is take a look at the classroom. If there are a lot of soft surfaces, and again, if we're in an art room or we're in another type of specialist room where there are a lot of hats and perhaps drama, things like that, hats and props and soft surfaces, then those should be really either cleaned or at least looked at to ensure that we're not passing lice on. Now, like Caitlin said earlier, if we can just close off the room for 2 or 3 days, we actually will basically allow all of the lice or the nits or anything else to disappear. And no, they won't really disappear, but they'll die and they'll no longer be a problem. And so if we're able to do that, great. If not, we should make sure that we're washing those things. And again, the idea is to do that in 130 degrees or higher temperature to make sure that we actually kill the lice before we put whatever stuff that is back into circulation. So put differently, we identify the student, we make sure that we notify the families of the class, we are sure to identify the student to any staff and faculty that may come into contact with the student. We're sure to clean up the classroom and make sure that any props and anything else that may be in the classroom that's a soft surface is cleaned appropriately. And we've basically managed the problem. What I find is that elementary schools are very comfortable and very used to dealing with lice. And so getting that message out is generally easy. There often are already template letters in place, and it's frankly just a monthly occurrence at this point for many of our schools. The peak times tend to be after weekends, so Mondays after kids have gone on sleepovers and things like that over the weekend. After break, and again, the same logic applies. So as students are out doing whatever they're doing, a lot of times those activities that they're doing allow them to share lice relatively easily. And then at the beginning of the school year, we tend to see a few cases, at least in September. So peak times Mondays right after break and at the very beginning of the school year. For our middle and high schools, we find that not only are they less likely to have had to experience this, and of the 25% of you that said, no, we really haven't had lice on campus, my guess is that you're probably a middle or a high school. But what we find is that when it does happen, that there's really no plan for it, and it's sort of a, oh my gosh, how could this happen, and what do we do about it? And so my recommendation to all of you is that you take a look at your template letters, and if you don't have one in place today, either email us so that we can get you one, or create one. You can certainly Google them and come up with some pretty easy letters. It should be about a half-a-page document, not much to say. But make sure that you've got that letter in place. And again, that goes back to being prepared on all levels. And it's not just being prepared for that great big earthquake. It's not just being prepared for that lockdown event or that fire or the storm or anything else. It's being prepared for literally anything that could come up. And if you're in a situation where more than one class has been impacted, and again, as we head into Thanksgiving, into winter breaks, both of these times are times that students may play, and students may come back where a sibling of a first grader may have it who is in fourth grade. And so now we've got a first grade and a fourth grade class, or we have a kindergarten, a first grade, and a third grade class, or anything like that. Then you may opt to do a lice check of the entire school. And again, we've decided, or at least as far as compliance is concerned, that we're allowed to have students on campus who have lice. What you decide at the school level may be different, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But over those breaks and over those periods of time, it's in fact almost a given that multiple classes will be impacted. And if that's the case, then typically an all-school check is important, an all-school email is important, or a letter, depending on how you communicate to your families. And then ensuring that we do that check again, either at the school level or at the family level a couple of days later. And finally, so the big question and the big decision that most of you are probably trying to make based on today's conversation is, do we allow students at our school to come back to school and to stay in school if they have lice? And of course, this is one of those questions that people ask me all the time, and I give them the same answer that I give to a lot of these questions, and that's, it depends. And the things that you should be asking, or the questions and sort of thoughts that should be going through your mind as you're evaluating whether or not to make a change in your policy, are, do I have a health office? Do I have somebody on campus who is going to be capable of and willing to do inspections on every student if that is necessary? Because we know that having kids on campus that have lice allows the single case to become an outbreak more easily than restricting them from campus. So in the event that I were to have to do a lice check for every single student in the school, do I have the capacity to do that? Question number 2 is, how frequently do I get it? And again, I'm not talking about me. I have actually never had lice, but I'm talking about how frequently does our school get it? Are we in elementary school where we're dealing with this monthly? And if so, is it that the students who get lice are routinely getting lice? And in doing so, are we actually excluding them from school so often that it's impacting their education? And certainly if the answer to that question is yes, then you should probably consider, at least consider allowing them to stay on campus in spite of lice. If you're a school that doesn't get them very frequently, and again, these tend to be our middle and our high schools, then you have a little bit more flexibility because you're not so much interfering with education as you are saying, hey, you know what, you've got lice, so stay home today. And so beyond that, the next question to really ask is, what do we do with other types of incidents? So do we allow students or staff or faculty to be on campus if they have a cold? Or do we have a no fever policy? Or do we have a no flu policy? Do we try to manage those types of illnesses and things like that? Or do we just say stay home? And based on that, try to identify a way to keep lice relatively consistent with a head cold. And again, the way to think about it is, if I've got a cold and it's no longer contagious and my nose is a little bit runny, can I be on campus or not? Well, if I've got lice and at this point they're not really jumping around a whole lot, or at least we know that even if they do, that there aren't really any side effects or challenges that go along with it, and that's our answer. Do we or do we not want to shift our policy? Now, regardless of what your policy is, it should be clearly stated. And so whether it's in the handbook or it's something that's a standalone policy doesn't make a huge difference. But you should articulate that you will or you will not allow students on campus with lice. If you determine that you will not allow them on campus, you should specifically identify what constitutes returning to school. So does it mean no nits? Does it mean no active lice? Does it mean they've been free and clear for 3 days? What does that actually mean, and what does that look like for your community? And then you should also identify within that policy a plan for getting that student access to education during the time that they're away. So if they're planning to be away for 2 to 4 to 5 days while this gets managed, how are we going to actually continue their education on a one-on-one basis, or are we? And it, again, doesn't matter what your policy is so long as there is one that's in place. The last question that we'll answer today and hopefully be able to start some conversation amongst you about is what we do with staff and faculty. Now, it stands to reason that we can tell an adult, or frankly anybody who's in, let's say, 9th grade or higher, that if they've got head lice, they should keep their heads to themselves. It works out that about half the time that works, and about half the time it doesn't. And for one reason or another, things still do, or lice still do, jump from head to head. That being said, if you, again, have a policy in place where you say, you know what, if you do have a head cold or you do have a little bit of a runny nose, you can be on campus, then my general recommendation is do the same thing with lice for staff and faculty and for our high school students. Just say, yep, no problem, be here, but make sure that you keep your heads to yourselves. And again, that we communicate that out if it's a student to anybody who may come into contact with them so that they can help us enforce that. If it's a staff or faculty member who's impacted, in general, we don't want to communicate out if specifically who it was, but certainly we could send out a letter just like we do for our students that says, hey, here's some information and here are some things that you should be looking for. And by the way, if you have kids, make sure that you're not rubbing your head against your kid's head just to make sure that we attempt to contain this where it is. Now, again, with any of these policies and any of these programs, it's important to make sure that you're comfortable with what the policy says. This is not one that I think in general needs to be run by a lawyer, although some of you certainly will and should do that. But all in all, this is probably one that you can just create internally, and so long as you have senior leadership buy-in, you should be okay. And if you're struggling with creating the policy, let us know. Give us a call, give us an email, and we'd be happy to walk you through either creating one or help you sort of solidify the policy that you have in place. With that, we're going to get ready to conclude, and I'd like to share with you just a couple of quick items. And the first is that in just a moment, we'll share with you a free assessment. So for those of you that have been on this series with us thus far, you remember this safety assessment. And basically what we do is for 90 minutes, we analyze your school, and we ensure that we have a good understanding, in fact, a ginormous understanding of what your school safety program looks like. And that's safety as it refers to disasters and preparedness, but also safety as it refers to just basic health stuff. So things like how we manage concussions and how we manage lice and how we manage immunizations and things like that. And so it'll be sort of a two-part assessment. The first part is generally geared towards emergencies and large-scale incidents, and then the second part geared towards health and how we deal with one-on-one situations. But as a result of being on today's conversation and being a part of today's conversation, we are excited to share that with you. So we'll chat that out to you in just a moment. And then also, we have a survey that we'll be sharing with you. And one of the things that we've loved about the survey feedback that we've gotten is your candid feedback. What's working, what's not, and what topics do you want us to cover in the future? So please ensure that you give us, or take 2 seconds to just jump onto that survey and really give us some thoughts. Are you enjoying the webinars? Are they covering and answering all of the questions that you like and need? Are there topics that we're not talking about yet or that you don't know we're talking about yet that you would like us to cover? And that will really help us continue to shape this series and ensure that we're giving you the right information at the right time. One of the questions that pretty consistently comes up is, can I have access to this information or to the slideshow after the presentation? And absolutely. We'll share with you by email a full copy of today's webinar as well as the handout so that you have access to that. And that'll probably come out in the next couple of hours / 24 hours, and I'll say that just in case. But in the next little while, you'll have access to it so that you can share this with either staff and faculty or your leadership team or, frankly, even parents. And so that's a question that's pretty recurring in that survey feedback, and again, one that we wanted to just make sure we answered for you. With that, we will be off next week as it's Thanksgiving, so we won't be on our series until the following Thursday, but when we come back, we're going to be coming back with business continuity and talking about how to get our business office to be stable enough and resilient enough to help our school really move forward after a large-scale emergency. And so we're excited for that, and in the meantime, hope you have a great Thanksgiving and a great couple of days away. And for those of you that get the full week off, we're officially jealous. So I'll end by just saying, again, a great big thank you to each of you for being on the series, and we hope you have a great Thanksgiving and can't wait to see you the following Thursday on our business continuity webinar at 10 o'clock Pacific and 1 o'clock Eastern. Thanks so much, and have a great week off.